Is Iran's government about to fall? Will the US invade Greenland? And why is Germany's Secret Service getting a whole lot more inquisitive? We'll look at all this and more on today's Trumpet World. Welcome back to Trumpet World. A few of our team are traveling in different directions this weekend, so we're back to recording individual segments. The protests in Iran have been one of the most dramatic news stories this week, with one report saying that 12,000 people have been killed. We'll get an update on that from Mihailo Zekic. Then we'll go to Andrew Miller for the latest news from the English-speaking world, including an update on a potential war over Greenland.
Well, this week we'll continue with what we talked about last week in the Middle East, the ongoing crisis in Iran. In our last week in review program, the protests there were gaining steam, were significant, but not what we could say one of the top one or two major stories in the world. I think you can make the case for that this week now. They've only accelerated since we've spoken last. There's been an estimated millions taking to the streets against the government of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in all of Iran's 31 provinces. But the big development of this story is how the regime has responded to these protests. Well, there's been reports that over 10,000 have been arrested. They've deployed the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, which to deploy them within Iran's borders to attack enemies within the country is rare. There's been a nationwide internet blackout, and the security forces have been firing live ammunition on people. And what has this led to? Well, there was this bombshell headline in Iran International this week that reads, "At least 12,000 killed in Iran crackdown as blackout deepens," end quote. 12,000. You didn't read that wrong. And that was their tallying just from January 8th and 9th, just from 2 days of fighting. 12,000. That seems like an astronomically large number. It could be easy to dispute that, but this is what Iran International's head editor said in a video interview with the Free Press. They detail more of their methodology in their article, but as you can see, it is about as well documented as something can get given the circumstances. And even just looking at those videos, even if that number is an overcount, there is still a lot of bloodshed going on in Iran. This is what they actually wrote in their article, quote, "In terms of geographic scope, intensity of violence, and the number of deaths in a short time span, this killing is unprecedented in Iran's history. Based on information received, those killed were mainly shot by the forces of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Basij," which is another security militia there. "This killing was fully organized, not the result of sporadic and unplanned clashes. Information received from the Supreme National Security Council and the Presidential Office indicates that the killing was carried out on the direct orders of Ali Khamenei, with the explicit knowledge and approval of the heads of all three branches of government, and with an order for live fire issued by the Supreme National Security Council," end quote. That is about 4 times the death toll of everybody killed in the 9/11 terror attacks. It's more people than have been estimated to kill in the Kosovo conflict, more people that were killed by far than in the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and a lot of other conflicts we've had in this world. It's a quarter of the number that were killed in Dachau concentration camp in 12 years in 2 days. And this is all supposedly, remember, under a moderate government. The president, Masoud Pezeshkian, the guy that runs the day-to-day operations of the government under the supreme leader, the supreme leader originally wanted him in there because of the last round of protests, because the Iranian government wanted somebody with a more moderate face. He's not a cleric, he's a former heart surgeon, to show Iran that we're bringing compassion back. We're not these strict, overarching, zealous tyrants. And this is the result of it. It reminded me of In Daniel chapter 7, when God speaks of the various empires that were going to control the Holy Land, he did so by portraying them as beasts, as a lion, as a leopard. The last one was a ferocious beast, not typified by any animal. In verse 5, is mentioned a bear. And if you could look through ancient history, you could look through Bible history. Our booklet, Daniel Unlocks Revelation, explains this. That bear represents the ancient Persians, who once ruled all the Middle East, the ancestors of the modern Iranian people today. So the Iranians are included in this list of giant empires typified as beasts. This is what Mr. Gerald Fleury wrote in our October 2023 print edition about this section. Quote, "We can view the leaders of those kingdoms as representatives of and prophetically interchangeable with the kingdoms themselves. And these world-ruling leaders had the heart of a beast. Their minds and their passions were fixed on world conquest. It bothered them not at all to oppress and even kill millions of people in pursuit of that goal." Further down, "How sobering. The leaders of these great powers no longer had the minds of human beings. They had the hearts of wild, raving beasts. That is why these empires are called beasts. They were ruled by men who took on the mind of a beast." End quote. That's what God's word said about Iran anciently. Isn't that a good description of what Iran is going through right now? Leaders with the mind of a beast, willing to slaughter thousands of their own people within days? That's exactly what we're seeing. But where do we go from here? Well, the go-to scripture we go to often here is Daniel 11, verse 40. I could read it. "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over." And you can read the rest of the chapter that talks about some of the other countries allied with the king of the south that fall to the king of the north. As Mr. Fleury has said repeatedly, this is an end-time prophecy, and the king of the south is fulfilled by Iran and radical Islam and Iran's proxy empire throughout the Middle East. And this has not been fulfilled yet. Iran has not reached the levels of power Daniel 11 describes as countries, again in the later verses, Egypt, Libya, Ethiopia, countries that are part of the Middle East, North Africa, that we expect to fall to Iran, that have their own problems with radical Islam, but are not there yet. Iran is not the overarching king that unsettles everybody else in the region around it just yet. It settles Europe, the king of the north. So something has to happen for Iran to reach those levels of power, but it is still a rising in power. And it is still a mindset. Verse 41 speaks about it fighting over the glorious land or the Holy Land. What it's fighting over today, it's still the same ideological vision. So we don't expect these protests one way or another to topple the regime, to change Iran to being a moderate, secular, Western-friendly country. When these protests, when headlines like Iran's internationals are coming out, there are other news organizations saying that this could mean the end of the regime. What have we seen in the days since then? Well, U.S. President Donald Trump said to all those Iranians that help is on the way. And then there's been reports that maybe some of his advisors have told him that if you just go into one strike like you did Maduro, there's not going to be regime change. I mean, I don't think you need top advisors to figure that out. Even apparently, according to the New York Times, on Wednesday, Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, spoke with President Trump and told him to stand down. And so did the governments of some other Arab countries, saying they're afraid that Iran will retaliate against them if America intervenes. And as of now, the situation could change at any moment, but the protests seem to be dying down. The Times of Israel headline, I believe, said that Iran, quote, smothered the protests. That doesn't mean that people's concerns are going away. It doesn't mean the economy is any better. It doesn't mean people are going to look at that 12,000 and pretend it never happened. And how many, for his part, he's pretty old. He could very well step aside. We don't necessarily expect him to be the one to trigger this push to turn Iran into this king of the South. He's been in power since 1989. That's a long time. But one way or another, Iran is going to survive this crisis, even if it takes some reforming, which it may or may not. and it is going to soar to new heights. And if you'd like to learn more about that, when America and Israel last year bombed Iran's nuclear facilities, our managing editor, Mr. Joel Hilliker, wrote an article called Is Iran's Regime Finished?, which gives you some of the big picture of why, no matter what crisis hits Iran, we still expect Iran to fulfill the King of the South prophecy.
The Arctic is becoming a battleground. This is one of the most strategic yet underlooked regions in the world. In addition to its mineral wealth, if you actually look at the world from the top, find a globe and look at it from the top, you'll see that the shortest distance between Europe and North America is over the Arctic Ocean. Same for Russia. Shortest distance between Russia and North America is over the Arctic Ocean. That means most of Russia's nuclear silos are oriented towards the Arctic. America has a space Force base at the top of Greenland. It uses to detect nuclear threats. And many nations, including Russia, China, Denmark, Germany, and the United States, are very interested in this strategic location. President Donald Trump has made a big talking point of his since his first term that Greenland is absolutely necessary for U.S. national security, and has made it known that he wants to acquire Greenland. He's ramped up that rhetoric in recent days to the point where the Europeans are actually getting concerned. Greenland is a semi-autonomous province of Denmark. It has its own prime minister, it has its own parliament, and it has a constitutional right to secede from the Kingdom of Denmark in a referendum if it wants to, but is still technically under the King of Denmark. It's like a commonwealth. The King of Denmark is the King of Greenland, Denmark, and the Faroe Islands. Denmark does not want to surrender Greenland, and so when Donald Trump escalated his rhetoric towards the beginning of this week, saying that not only does he want to buy Greenland, he's actually prepared to invade it if need be to keep it from falling into the Russian and Chinese hands. So Denmark has now partnered with France and Sweden and Norway and Canada and Germany and the United Kingdom to put together a European Union troop force to deploy to Greenland. This is largely symbolic. I believe there's 13 German soldiers in this force, a few French soldiers, like I said, a few UK soldiers, a few Swedes, a few Norwegians, a few Danes, maybe a couple Canadians. Altogether, it's less than 36 people. And so when you're looking at this troop buildup, America has 150 Space Force troops at its space base in Greenland. The European Union is now sending like 36 for a short mission just over the weekend, basically as a symbolic show that Greenland is part of the European Union and not something that the European Union is willing to let the United States take. So we'll see how all this plays out in the days ahead. This morning I saw that President Donald Trump, he's actually preparing a $700 billion offer for Greenland. Much of that would be divided between Greenland's 57,000 citizens. So you're talking about well over $1 million per citizen of Greenland. If he wants to do a cash payout to bring this into the United States. And that offer could very well be accepted. We'll see what happens in the weeks and months ahead. But I did really want to highlight this story today because today is January 16th. That's the anniversary of the death of the late Herbert W. Armstrong, who founded our predecessor, the Plain Truth magazine. And who God used to restore prophetic understanding to his church in the end time. And so oftentimes on January 16th and January 17th, God does something to highlight in the eyes of the world the importance of his end time Elijah, Herbert W. Armstrong. This January 16th is particularly important because it's not just the anniversary of his death, but it's the 40th anniversary of his death. And 40 is a very significant number, a very significant symbolic number throughout the Bible. And so this really highlights to us the fact that this German deployment, which just as a bit of additional information, this is the first time Germany has actually sent troops to counter the United States into the Western Hemisphere since World War II. So symbolically, this is a big breakthrough for Germany. This is German soldiers in the Western Hemisphere trying to send a message to America that you can't annex this piece of real estate. And so even though it's only 13 soldiers, it's symbolic. So we need to ask ourselves, what does this symbolic move by Germany mean, considering that it happened on the 40th anniversary of the death of Herbert W. Armstrong? Because if you read Herbert W. Armstrong, his most popular book was The United States and Britain and Prophecy. It's not his greatest book. That would be Mystery of the Ages. It was his the greatest book he ever written, but definitely probably one of the top 5 greatest books he ever wrote, and the one that was the most popular while he was alive was The United States and Britain and Prophecy, showing that the United States and Britain and British Commonwealth are descended from the lost tribes of ancient Israel, and then especially highlighting a promise God made to Abraham in Genesis 22, and then reconfirmed to Moses in Deuteronomy 28, that the end-time descendants of ancient Israel would possess the gates of their enemies. And these are specifically the strategic geographic gates of the world, mainly the sea gates, maritime choke points like the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, the Straits of Gibraltar, even Greenland, which controls many of the sea lanes through the Arctic. These are gates that God gave end-time Israel and that the United States and Britain used to gain victory in World War II. The Allies would not have won World War II if it wasn't for the fact that they controlled Greenland at the time, and they controlled Panama at the time, and they controlled Suez at the time, and they controlled Gibraltar at the time. And so the prophecy God confirmed to Moses in Deuteronomy 28 is that if the end-time descendants of ancient Israel turned against him, America's enemies would seize those gates and use them against them. And so this is one of the main Anglo-American prophecies we watch, is America's loss of control over these sea gates. Great Britain and the United States used to control almost all the maritime choke points on the earth. Now they control very few. And Greenland is another important one that President Donald Trump is saying that we actually just need to make this an official U.S. territory. It's so strategically important. And now you've got Germany and the rising Holy Roman Empire definitely staking a claim that, no, we're going to keep this. And when the time comes for the prophecies to be fulfilled about this empire using these gates against America, we'll use Greenland against it as well. So it's definitely a story to watch very closely in the days and months ahead. It's also an interesting story. Another related story is the story that actually on January 17th, this weekend, the European Union is signing a trade agreement with Mercosur. That's the South American trade bloc. So you're already seeing the European Union try to forge a huge free trade zone with South America. At the same time, it's sending troops to Greenland. And so even though it's not very many troops right now, it kind of reveals a bit of the EU's strategy that if you can integrate South America into your economic system at the same time getting Greenland, you basically have all the major sea lanes to the United States under your control, through Panama, through Cuba, past Venezuela, up through Greenland. And so this is really a big move we need to watch for in the days and months ahead. Other Bible prophecies, such as 2 Kings 14, indicate there will be a resurgence in American power just before it finally falls, if its people don't heed God's message and repent. And so it's not impossible that Donald Trump could gain some more temporary American influence in Greenland. But the fact that these German troops are going there on January 16th really does show the European Union's long-term plan for the Arctic. In other Anglo-American news, we've got a couple related stories to this trade besiegement. The Supreme Court of Panama hasn't ruled yet, but is getting ready to rule very soon on whether it's constitutional in Panama for the Chinese to own the ports on either side of the Panama Canal. And so the ruling in that case is going to have a huge bearing on American control over another vital seagate. The Pope Leo XIV, met with the opposition leader of Venezuela this week and is definitely telegraphing his intent to the world for the Vatican to be very involved in shaping the new regime in Venezuela now that Nicolas Maduro has been arrested. And so even though it's American Pope, he's the head of Vatican City, which is in Europe and right at the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. So there we're seeing another attempt by this Catholic-dominated European empire to extend its influence into America. And then with the rioting against immigration officials in Minnesota, President Trump threatened yesterday that if Minnesota officials aren't able to get the civil unrest under control, he may invoke the Insurrection Act and send in federal troops. Which, if he did that, would probably be successful in putting down the insurrection. But it's another sign of things to come, in that if you read what Trump editor-in-chief Gerald Flurry has written in his book, Isaiah's End Time Vision, and Ezekiel the End Time Prophet, especially Ezekiel the End Time Prophet, you will see that he talks about this great trade siege against America that results when the European Union starts taking control of seagates like Panama and Greenland, will create massive civil war-like conditions in America that will result in mass death. Actually, Ezekiel 5 indicates about a third of the population. And so as you're watching China and the European Union make moves to besiege America, it's also important to watch the civil unrest within America. And this idea that the Insurrection Act is even needed to put down some of the civil unrest we already have could show how bad that unrest will get when the time for that prophecy to be ultimately fulfilled comes.
Germany has been very aggressive in trying to get troops to Greenland. If Andrew hadn't been planning on taking that as his main story, it probably would have been the biggest news from Europe this week. Germany can be very reluctant to send its troops places on some occasions, but confronting Donald Trump in Greenland, well, then they've caught everyone by surprise with their speed. Germany is very strategic. It's not that it doesn't necessarily want to use its military, but it doesn't want to waste it. If a particular deployment or war is not going to move them towards their goals, they sit it out. But they see clear value in being in the Arctic. And another very significant event tomorrow that relates to this is that the EU will finally sign their trade deal with Mercosur, this Latin American trade bloc. They agreed on it a few years ago. I think it was a couple of years ago. It took them decades to negotiate it. There's still a little more of the political agreement that they're going to get done, but the trade deal is done. And Germany's moving into America's north now with what's happening in Greenland. And they're making this deal and forging very strong links to South America. This is very significant. We'll get in more to the detail on next week's show. I'm tempted to cover it now, but then if anything significant happens during the kind of signing ceremony, well, then I'm going to be tempted to cover it again next week. So I think we'll save it and just hit it all at once. And I'll be back in our regular studio. Maybe I can discuss it with Andrew Miller then. Instead, I want to focus on another critical prong of Germany's military buildup, and that revolves around their intelligence service, the BND. They're on the brink of becoming a lot more powerful and a lot more independent from the US. This is what the government is pushing for. There's a new law that the government is working on, and details of this leaked out to German press, including outlets like the Süddeutsche Zeitung, the public broadcaster NDR, WDR, and they said that what this would do is it would remove a lot of constraints on the BND. It would make them something more like America's NSA. A lot of these articles focused on a massive data hub in Frankfurt. It's Europe's largest hub. A huge amount of data goes through this. And the BND has a presence inside this hub in Frankfurt. They're already doing a lot of data monitoring. But now the Chancellor's office want to allow them to do more to store this data, to sort through this data. So they want to store whatever they want for up to 6 months. This is without a warrant. They want to allow more spying on foreigners because a lot of international internet data travels through this hub, but also a whole lot of German data. They also want to empower the BND to kind of more aggressively go out and seek data. So they're enabling them to go and hack other countries. The press reports say they're basically giving them the green light to go and hack Facebook and Twitter or X or any of these big American companies. They'll be allowed to go and infiltrate US social media companies, saying that these companies don't voluntarily share enough with the US government. They're also working on building other cyber warfare capabilities, authorizing them to do more to hack IT technology, both in Germany and around the world. And basically a lot of the reports are saying all of the stuff that American spy agencies were caught doing in things like the Edward Snowden leak that was a scandal at the time, they're giving the German intelligence services specific permission to go and do those things. So all of this wouldn't be the German Secret Service going out on a limb, but they would be actively encouraged, allowed to do this from the US government. And underscoring kind of how remarkable this is, we recently got a book that came out that showed that Germany's intelligence service, the BND, was caught spying on and hacking into the phones of Barack Obama back in 2013. And I think what's remarkable about this is not that a foreign secret service was trying to hack into the US president's phone. I can just kind of assume they're all doing that. But it's the fact that Germany threw a hissy fit right around the same time because Barack Obama was caught spying on Angela Merkel's phone. So complete hypocrisy from Germany there, where they were throwing all of the toys out of the pram, saying Barack Obama was caught, or America and the NSA was caught listening into Angela Merkel, while they were doing exactly the same thing to Barack Obama. And this book showed that this was known among high levels. Like, this wasn't a couple of rogue agents. They were being completely hypocritical here. But there's a lot that is very concerning about this. And one is, we have a section in our new He Was Right book that talks about what Herbert W. Armstrong said about Germany going underground. I mean, he was writing in 1945 and saying, watch what happens. The authorities here in Germany and senior Nazis, and maybe not the most public, well-known figures, some of them stood trial, but many other senior Nazis, they're going underground. And one key to that this you could say is a fulfilled prophecy from Herbert W. Armstrong, is the BND, is the German intelligence service. This was built up basically by Reinhard Gehlen, an intelligence officer for the Nazis, who did exactly this. 1944 or so, he could see the writing was on the wall. He could see the Nazis were going to lose. He goes and hides all of his intelligence documents and makes sure that he surrenders to the US and said, hey, I was in charge of the Abwehr, the military intelligence focusing on Russia. I mean, we all know there's some tension coming after this war ends between the US and Russia. My information, my organization could be really helpful to you. And America saw that. They worked with Galen. He was brought into the CIA. He was given very light treatment. And then Galen basically set up the BND. And then, of course, this organization, set up by someone that used to work for Nazi military intelligence, ends up sheltering a whole lot of Nazis. And as recently as 2007, the BND was caught covering this history up, deleting all of its old files about its early members so that it wouldn't be exposed as to just how thoroughly infiltrated it was. There have been some tremendously concerning scandals over the years, one involving various far-right groups murdering migrants, with German Secret Service intelligence officials being at the scene of the murders and then just claiming like, oh, I didn't notice. They are not the least observant spy organization in the history of the world. In one of these, somebody was murdered in an internet cafe. Basically, the German intelligence agent who just, according to the official narrative, completely by coincidence was there, would have had to step over the body on her way out of the cafe. And she claims, yep, just there's coincidence and didn't notice the dead body. And there's a lot of very strange things going on within the BND. And now they're getting much more intelligence for cyber, or ability to look into cyber warfare. Another important part of this is a prophecy that Mr. Flurry's talked about a lot. In fact, here's a clip from him in the Key of David talking about this.
You think about all of this, these problems that we're facing, and we really do need to go to God today and thank God that something terrible hasn't occurred. And God says He will send a warning to our people. It's our only hope that it warns us about what is going to happen so we can make a change and we can turn, because what God is concerned about is our sins and what we're doing that it should not be done, and of course is very much against what the Bible teaches. Now, people could scoff at that today, but that is nevertheless true, and it was prophesied thousands and thousands of years ago. So it's not something that God didn't know years ago. He knew all about it and prophesied in detail. You'll be amazed at some of these prophecies about this end time and what is going to happen in the field of nuclear warfare and other big problems we face. Notice Ezekiel 7 and verse 14. They have blown the trumpet, even to make all ready, but none goes to the battle, for my wrath is upon all the multitude thereof. Well, is that cyber warfare, where you can't even respond to when the trumpet is blown and there is a danger of war, and they can't even respond because of cyber warfare? Well, it may very well be it's just that bad. It's something we should ponder carefully.
And some of those scriptures, like that one in Ezekiel 7, it matches exactly to what you could have as a consequence of cyber warfare. There's the alarm blown, something's going on, America's military needs to rally, and nothing happens because they've been hacked. And Mr. Flurry, right from the start, he kind of picked up on a report about this back in the early 90s, about this being America's Achilles heel, and because of these type of prophecies said, well, watch for Germany to exploit that. And more we see Germany really working on their cyber capabilities. So an important story from Germany, and you put this together with, well, the German military is very quick to move into Greenland, and they want to make sure America doesn't get control of that. They're forming these close bonds with Latin America. They're working on cyber warfare. America completely trusts Europe, completely trusts Germany. But they're taking these steps in exactly the direction that the Bible said they would, and that Herbert W. Armstrong talked about. And a lot of people, for a lot of the time that Herbert W. Armstrong was warning, were kind of saying, well, America, Germany going after America. Well, that sounds far-fetched. I think a lot of people would still say that it's far-fetched. But look at the steps that they're taking. They're preparing to bring Europe together to be this major dominant power, and they're preparing to take down the United States. That's what all of these steps are all about. And on that front, the European Union Defense Commissioner, Andreas Kubilis, he called for a powerful standing European military force last week of 100,000 troops. So he's saying we need 100,000 troops. And yeah, okay, calling for 100,000 troops is easier than having a military with 100,000 troops. They're not able to manufacture that just out of thin air. But this is the way that European leaders are thinking. This is the kind of consensus that is building at the EU level. And of course, they have armies, very strong armies, all around Europe. It's just about coordinating them, getting them to work together. So they are absolutely focused on doing that as well. So watch this rising German power. So those are Europe's most significant stories. We'll finish up now with Jeremiah Jacques and the biggest stories from Asia.
The big story for Asia is that while U.S. President Donald Trump shakes the global order, China is seizing the moment, working with renewed urgency to deepen partnerships and fortify alliances. Last week, Chinese leader Xi Jinping hosted South Korean President Lee Jae-myung in Beijing. This was the first time in 6 years that a South Korean president has visited China, and Mr. Lee actually spent 4 days there, holding all kinds of meetings with Xi and other Chinese officials and just working to strengthen China-South Korea ties. South Korea, of course, is a United States ally, but President Trump's tariffs on the nation, and just with so much uncertainty and erraticism from the U.S. leadership, the South Koreans seem to be hedging their bets. And the Chinese, of course, are all too eager to step in. They would love nothing more than to see South Korea pulled away from U.S. influence and more deeply into China's orbit. So that visit was very notable. And then this week, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi completed a tour of African nations. He stopped in Ethiopia, Lesotho, and Tanzania, mostly to deepen trade with those countries and to advance various projects related to China's Belt and Road Initiative. So that's a significant tour that was just conducted there. And China also hosted Canada's Mark Carney this week, trying to drive the wedge more deeply in between the United States and Canada. And next month, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz will be traveling to Beijing and meeting with President Xi Jinping. Mostly, they will be working to improve trade relations between Germany and China. So China's really trying to step in with nations that are shaken by the U.S.'s unpredictability and its territorial threats toward allies and other erratic policies. And China is sort of trying to present itself as an alternative in many cases, reliable, predictable, and reasonable as an ally. Now, I don't think that it would be accurate to say that China really is all of those things. Under Chairman Xi, the nation has become ever more arrogant and even coercive, and we see China, of course, threatening its neighbors in ways that are more serious than the situation with the Trump administration. Exhibit A for that, of course, is Taiwan. So it's not actually a situation where China is, upright and altruistic and a safe alternative to the United States. But that doesn't stop the Chinese from trying to portray themselves that way at times. And I don't think that any of these nations who are lining up to have these meetings with Xi Jinping, I don't think that any of them are naive about what he is and what China is and what its goals are. But they feel that given the geopolitical climate, it's still wise to kiss Xi Jinping's ring and just to work toward closer ties with him. Alexander Dukalskis is in the International Relations Department at University College Dublin, and he spoke about this week to Bloomberg. He said, "Faced with the U.S. acting belligerent and erratic on the international stage, many leaders will conclude they need to be at least on decent terms with China." End quote. So more and more nations are looking to China and deepening ties with it, including trade ties. And this is significant in light of Bible prophecy because there are passages in Isaiah 23 and Ezekiel 27 that talk about a mighty economic alliance that will soon come together between China and European nations and some other nations as well. And when you put those chapters beside Deuteronomy 28:52, it's easy to see that the main reason this economic alliance will be formed is to besiege America and to actually block the United States out of world trade. Trump editor-in-chief Gerald Flurry has written a lot about these passages over the years, especially in his book, Isaiah's End Time Vision. And he shows that this is actually how World War III will begin. So when we see Xi Jinping shoring up China's influence with various nations and hosting all these leaders in Beijing, especially the German chancellor, just to, find ways to deepen trade between China and Germany and these other nations, it is setting the stage for this mighty alliance to come together. And if anyone would like to understand more about the significance of this alliance and what it will do in the time ahead, I hope you'll order your free copy of that book that I mentioned by Mr. Flurry. Once again, it's called Isaiah's End Time Vision. And then a couple of smaller stories about Asia as well. First up, the U.S. reached a trade deal yesterday with Taiwan, which will lower tariffs on Taiwanese goods and services sold in the U.S. to 15%. As part of this agreement, the Taiwanese also agreed that their leading chip companies and other leading tech companies will invest at least $250 billion in the United States. So it sounds like a promising sign of partnership between the U.S. and between the U.S. and Taiwan. And of course, this comes just a month after the U.S. sold Taiwan its largest ever arms package. So in a way, this is sort of a counterweight to all of that Chinese diplomacy and trade that the last story was about. And all of these U.S.-Taiwan measures, they do appear to be encouraging for those who want to see America's chip dominance fortified and for those who support Taiwan's freedom and its democracy. But will these measures be enough to deter China? That's the big question. And the truth is, the will of the United States and its commitments remain very much in question. And that means the long-term outlook for Taiwan, perhaps even the medium-term outlook, still looks bleak. And then one final story here about Russia and Venezuela. Radio Free Europe headlined on Wednesday that Maduro is gone from Venezuela, but Russia may not be. They detail the way Putin's regime spent more than 2 decades cultivating deep personal relationships with a whole cast of Venezuelan leaders, not just Maduro, but a whole cast of political leaders and also various business leaders. And their assessment is that even with Maduro himself gone, much of Russia's influence in the nation remains. And that's especially true since there was no regime change with this United States operation. Blackbeard was captured, but his crew remains very much on deck. Maduro is gone, but his vice president is now in power as the de facto leader of the nation. So the operation, it certainly was a blow to Russian power in Latin America, a notable blow, but it looks like plenty of roots still remain in place in terms of Russian influence there, and we can be sure that the Russians will do everything they can to rebuild their power there on America's doorstep if they are permitted to.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jeremiah. And to all of our contributors, thank you as well to Mr. Matthew Friesen for engineering and production. I'll just leave you with one short booklet recommendation. We are recording this on January 16th, and some of us are recording even the day before, others are recording on the morning of January 16th. there's a lot of significant events that often happen on January 16th. It's entirely possible that by the time this is edited and posted, kind of towards the afternoon US time on Friday, that some of these stories might be out of date, or maybe overnight, or the next day. And in that case, I want to point you to just our little book, January 16th, God's Miracle Day. And that talks about this day, why there have been lots of significant news events on this day, goes through some of what those events are, and talks about why. Because on this show, we talk a lot about Herbert W. Armstrong. We're reading quotes from Herbert W. Armstrong. Why are we doing that? Well, Christ's disciples in Matthew 24 asked him, well, what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of end of the world? And one of the things that Christ responded with is that the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, then shall the end come. And fairly soon after Christ died and was resurrected, and the gospel went around the world in the first century, but then it was suppressed and replaced by a false gospel, another gospel not taught in the Bible. And Christ said that would happen, that it wouldn't go out around the world after that initial burst until the end comes, until shortly before his return. And then we can put that beside another prophecy in Matthew 17, where he says that before he returns, Elijah truly shall first come and restore all things. So the implication of those two passages together is that you would have this Elijah who would restore truth, lost truth to God's church, including the true gospel, and then that gospel would go around the world, and this would be a critical sign of the imminence of Jesus Christ's return. And that prophecy has been fulfilled. Herbert W. Armstrong was that end-time Elijah, and we have other material that can help you prove that, and our little January the 16th booklet is even a good place to get started on that. That will help point you in the right direction. But January the 16th, 1986 was the date of his death. And so that anniversary, well, that God emphasizes that often through world events. I mean, that date reminds the world that an end-time Elijah has been and gone. And it points to our only source of true hope. It points to Jesus Christ, that he's alive, he's active, he's fulfilling his prophecies, he sent his Elijah, he's about to return, he's about to intervene, he's about to solve all of these problems, depose all of these evil rulers that we're always talking about, and bring real lasting peace to this world. So our free book, January 16th, God's Miracle Day, can give you much more information about that. We'd be happy to send that to you. You can order that on our website, thetrumpet.com, and it helps you show how this day points to an incredible hope for all of mankind and how you can learn much more about that. So all of our material is free. We just want to get this out to the largest audience possible. So there's no catch, there's no follow-up, there's no pressure. You can read it online or you can order your own print copy. I mean, it's a very short little booklet. It won't take you very long to get through it. Maybe this one, I'm usually urging people to order it so that they have the print and can study it alongside the Bible. And that's probably still a good idea, but you might even want to just read it online so you can get it the same day. You can read it right away on our website. But thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions, any comments, you can get in touch at trumpetworld@thetrumpet.com. We'd be very happy to hear from you. We'll be back with our regular Wednesday show next week. And until then, keep watching your world.